thought I'd slip this one in before we get to the final list. Oxbow are an experimental rock band renowned among their listeners as a chaotic, noisy, and highly challenging group, and I can only imagine what the initial reactions to their first two albums, Fuckfest and King of the Jews, must have been like back in the 90s. As if the blaring atonal cacophony of guitars wasn't disorienting and scary enough, sounding like clawed hands just digging and ripping into the skin of comfort and just really getting under there. We have Oxbow's frontman, Eugene S. Robinson, just screaming and snarling and muttering over them, making this primal, enraging flood of emotions that are doused in fear and anger and grief and confusion utterly tangible. And if their first album, Fuckfest, is enough of a challenge, King of the Jews, their second album, pushes that to the limit with a runtime of over an hour long. Just very frightening, sour, and soul-crushing material that will grate your ears and spin your head in the freakiest ways. As Oxbow went on, the band tempered their chaotic noise rock blasts into something that was a little more accessible and even beautiful at times. Certainly still keeping the disturbing sounds and the emotional turmoil that made them so strange in the first place, but there was just a little more, I guess, organization to it, if that makes sense. Be it the 2002 album In Evil Heat, which toyed with a sludgier, heavier rock sound that was definitely on the sludge metal side of things. An album that would certainly capture fans of more traditional rock. Or the album that came out before this new one here, 2007's The Narcotic Story. An album that is lush and grandiose and brings in these orchestral arrangements, resulting in what sounds like a big conceptual theatre piece of an album. It is this arranged orchestral instrumentation that preludes the sounds of 2017's Thin Black Duke. An album that is, in my opinion, a manifestation of every best feature of Oxbow's music, just amped up to their peaks in beauty, tragedy, musicianship, and raw, pained emotion. Here we are greeted with the snarled, anguished musings of a madman just entirely lost in a world and not sure if what's spiraling out of control is them or their surroundings. It's a paranoia and discomfort fueled by the failings and fragilities in ego and masculinity. An album that follows the character of a duke, described like a caricature on the track A Gentleman's Gentleman, and introduced on the opening track Cold and Well-Lit Place as an alcoholic who refuses to settle his drinking habits if it threatens his manhood. It's the orchestra-backed theatre piece of a life crisis, but there is a supreme elegance behind all of this dwindling chaos. To highlight the opening track Cold and Well-Lit Place again, this song has kept me coming back to it again and again and again for its amazing composition and Eugene S. Robinson's vocal performances, which are just insane. The whistling lures me in, the gutsy guitar riffs just recurring throughout. There are some tense and terrifying string crescendos that make me feel like I'm being torn apart, just ripped right in half. Despite all of that, there is just this beauty, this undeniable beauty to the track that it just keeps me coming back to it. Robinson is either whimpering in fear or he's growling to kind of instill fear or fright in the listener. And he even beckons us to join in on his alcohol drinking session as he bellows, "I didn't bring these drinks for nothing." Concluding this track is Robinson shrieking in anguish, and there's even a sense of betrayal as the Duke realizes that his bravado and masculinity-fueled ego has come at a mighty cost. While they tell you the best things in life are free, everything around you comes with a fee. It's scary, but it beckons me into its world, and the album only continues to rock and roll me back and forth like a ship on unstable waters. And believe me, there are some fitting times on this album to feel a little bit seasick. One of these moments, however, is not on the second track, Ecce, Homo, which stands as the gorgeous, romantic, and even blissful moment the album needed to kind of balance out such a twisted and pummeling opening track. I mean, to be honest, elsewhere you're just being hammered with cold hard crash after cold hard crash, with tense strings and heavy guitars and a lot of very primal, scary screaming. Such is shown on the track Host, which sounds sour and dire all the way through, up until its ending, which is a little more serene and in a very jarring way. But what happens is it sounds like a very satisfying melodic release of tension, I guess. It makes sense that everything before it just sounded so chaotic and just uncomfortable, and suddenly at the end there's this release, there's this moment of bliss. Robinson repeats keywords in a way that sounds bold and loud, but also a little more relaxed and less tense. The little xylophone hits with each word that he says, they do actually ring with a genuine beauty as well. Elsewhere on the record, we see our Duke frantically muttering over A Gentleman's Gentleman, a track that is the most energized and primal on here. I absolutely love how Robinson's own voice crescendos from a snarl, just a to a growl, and this aggression is only helped by the hits of piano, making the track sound very theatrical, but it also adds a sense of wonder and awe to the piece. Think of A Gentleman's Gentleman as the character portrait of the Duke. Our Duke has very tragic run-ins with death or feelings of wasting away when a track like The Upper comes in to speak of a heavenly afterlife, or perhaps a track like The Finished Line, which just seems like one big crashing flood of fear and regret to hammer it in at the end of the record. Narrative-wise, this album is pretty hard to grasp. Me trying to figure out a concept or a story on the Thin Black Duke was really a bonus for me, and it just a little thing that kind of added to my appreciation for this album. But what really shines the most here is Oxbow's refined yet just ambitious to evoke such raw emotion, but also stay very theatrical and huge and musically interesting. There are little intricacies and pockets of beauty all over the album for people who want that, and there are still like a lot of chaotic splashes of noise for those who wish to be challenged or disturbed or scared. But it always hits this sweet and sour balance between those sides. If you haven't listened to any of the songs on this album, do so and try to decipher those lyrics the first time you listen to it. It is pretty hard, but this was never a problem for me because the emotional impact of each track lies more in how our frontman is delivering those lines. We hear vulnerability in his voice, we can hear when he's trembling with fear, we can hear when he's trying to put up a more aggressive and bold image, trying to square up a little bit. Eugene Robinson certainly flourishes as a vocalist here with so many different tones and character voices that he puts forward, but none of them seem out of place. They all seem just so fitting in the record. Oxbow have released an opus with Thin Black Duke. It has kept me rolling for months, and while it was initially a grower, its initial impact has kind of increased to a very daunting and fear-instilling size. It's an album that reminds me how beauty can lie in even the most dismal of places. And if that last statement seemed weak, that's because it is. I just wanted to make this review feel somewhat conclusive. Thin Black Duke blew me away entirely over the course of 2017, and is still doing so right now. This album does indeed stand as the grandest statement yet. I'm giving this a strong 10 out of 10.